Okay, it's 7:04. It looks like we may just be a fairly small group tonight. We had 13 people last time and a lot participated. But I think, as I've mentioned to you, I fear I was trying to beat us through too many things and moved us along a little too quickly. But so for official beginning, I'm Joellen Clary for the JASNA West Michigan group sponsoring this slow read. And my project partner, Melissa Fox, will be on as soon as she can. I sent out, some of you may not even have seen this, but I sent out some suggestions this afternoon when I finally got them written about what things we might consider this evening. And I just want to point out that they do not have to, they don't have to appear in the order of which they're listed. There is a kind of order there, but we don't need to worry about that. And especially as we're sharing a few upfront overall reactions to the book, where we are now, things that really hit you over the head this time, don't worry if there's overlap, okay? So if I move things along too quickly, as is sometimes the way I work, just speak up, please, and say, wait a minute, and we'll get going. Okay, before we actually get started, I'd like to situate ourselves just a little bit. So a quick review about dates and seasons and where we are now in relation to where we've been. We noted when we were reading the first 6 chapters that we covered a lot of territory. Fanny went from 10 years old to 18 years old, and we met a lot of characters along the way. In the fall, when she was 18, is when Sir Thomas decides that he and his son Tom need to set sail for Antigua. And the rest of the novel will basically take about 2 years from there. So we whisked up to that point, and now we've been coming through some seasons, and we'll kind of pay attention, because now the book is it will telescope again a little bit. But we were whisked through winter when Fanny's gray pony died and when Mr. Rushworth came onto the scene. Then in July, okay, so we're coming around toward a year, the Crawfords arrive and we visit Southerton. Tom returns in late summer, like early September after that, okay? So that's where we are now. And Sir Thomas is expected home in November. And that expectation plays a big role in this section, chapters 12 to 18, really. And this chapters 12 to 18, which we'll be talking about tonight, occurred during the hiatus between Tom's return home and Sir Thomas's return home. So I would like us at this point, we've read over a quarter of the novel so far. I think at the end of last week's session, we were a quarter of the way through. So could we just share some quick overall reactions to the book? You don't have to stick with them. They don't have to stay with you. Liking it, hating it, befuddled, connections anywhere else. What are you thinking off the top of your head at this point? Beth?
I was really struck this time as I'm reading I have to catch up. I've been on the road for 3 weeks, so I'm in my hotel room.
Yeah.
But how little Fanny has a role in her own life. I just was really struck by, even when they're walking through when they're at Southerton and when they're talking about the play, there's a lot going on in her head, but there's not a lot going on in her voice. And so there's so much that she thinks about and feels, which I think there's more now than there was in the beginning, but there just seems to be so much happening to her and not with her.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, that's a balance that we'll continue to pay attention to. We've been charting how much Fanny talks versus what she thinks, what direct kind of role she plays in that sense. And we'll keep paying attention to that. But we do seem to get to a kind of point of crisis in that regard in terms of Fanny's control over her life, especially in this reading today. Someone else? Wendy?
what I noticed, and I was saying earlier, that reading it a second or third time is so much more giving than reading for the story. That the depth becomes more and more apparent. And what occurred to me is if the desert island choice of books were happening and one were to grab one book, you want to grab one that you want to read a couple times
or more.
Because you're one might say that the worst thing that could happen is to be without a book and stuck with nothing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this would be one that you could just read a page and you could just keep going. So I could point out what jumped out as I was going through on a second go round, that if we turn it, and it's in relation to having been shown that the first paragraph of the novel sets up characters and gives us three sisters and tells us who they are. But if we turn to page 17, and it's page
Chapter 17
in my book.
Chapter 17.
Did I say that right? Chapter 17. What did I say?
Chapter 17. In the Penguin is page 146.
Right.
But first paragraph, chapter 17, right?
In the Penguin. Yeah.
Yep,
so
good.
what was interesting, and the first paragraph of each chapter does this, but this one was particularly interesting because the chapter begins with the word triumphant and ends with the word descent. So that it was a triumphant day to Mr. Bertram and Maria. Such a victory over Edmund's discretion had been beyond their hopes and was most delightful. So we have Tom Bertram and Maria, who are very excited over Edmund agreeing to be in the play. Nothing more to disturb them in their darling project, and they congratulated each other in private on the jealous weakness to which they attributed the change, with all the glee of feelings gratified in every way, and so on. Now, in the next sentence, Edmund is looking grave because now we've got a shift from triumph to despair. And the last sentence reads, Edmund had descended from that moral elevation which he had maintained before, and they were both as much the better as the happier for the descent. So we have the two gloating, and we have Edmund at the bottom. And it's a distinct change from the beginning to the end. And that word descent takes us into the rest of the chapter.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, one of the prompts that I sent today talks about arcs of the narrative. And this is just an arc that's setting up, telling us where we are at the beginning of chapter 17 when Edmund has caved about acting. And those arcs, like in this, I'm not doing that right. I'm not sure how it's working for you, but Tom and Mariah are way up here. They're
gloating.
They've won, and Edmund, as a moral figure, has descended, certainly in not only his eyes, but that's a good point. And so paying attention to character, kind of plot lines and how they relate to each other, because they'll almost always do that. One character rises, another falls. Thanks, Wendy. So we need to talk as much about rereading as slow reading. Really running it down. Anybody else? Just general impressions, anything you'd like to share right now? Overall reactions to the book?
I was just surprised how much this play really meant to the people. I mean, it was such a big deal to be asked to do or wanting to do a part. I don't know why.
Does Yeats give us a clue to that?
I mean, I think it's that comment is related to sort of my general impression too, that these people are so idle. They're so incredibly idle, and anything that sort of gets their energy going becomes very important to them. And I think they are, we know that when Sir Thomas went away, the two daughters felt this like enormous load off their back, that they could sort of have a little freedom. So I think this is sort of, dad's out of town and we have a chance to do what we want. And I think they're pushing boundaries. I think they know they're pushing boundaries.
Mm-hmm. But let's turn to the first page of chapter 13. There's a long paragraph which begins, chapter 13 begins, the Honorable John Yates, okay? And in that entire paragraph, we're given a lot of information about the aristocracy. He's an honorable, he's been hobnobbing with Lord Ravenshaw for a private theatrical at Ecclesford in Cornwall, the Right Honorable. And we're toward the bottom of my page. He puts, and we're in free and direct discourse, more or less. Or maybe it's indirect dialogue that Austin is reporting. But he's so disappointed that they got to the point of presenting their play and they had to pull the plug because of a death in the family. He said, which of course could have immortalized the whole party for at least a 12 months. I love that sense of immortality. With its arrangements and dresses, rehearsals and jokes, it was his never failing subject. And to boast of the past, his only consolation. In general, we're told there was an itch among young people to be acting. And could we just, it goes on with him. It's really very, very funny through there. But what metaphors come up when we talk about theater and plays and kinds of things that especially a fiction writer might have a lot of fun with? Play acting. Can that be a sense of release, as was suggested Sir Thomas's absence is?
So she's got a real connection to Shakespeare. And of course, in Hamlet, he has a troupe of actors put on a play to catch the conscience of the king. So there's this sense of the play acting is not just a release, it's a way to catch them out in their actual characters. They're not so much acting as losing their restrictions, so that they're appearing more for who they really are. So most of the acting they do is in their own society day to day, where they have to behave in certain ways. But you put them on a stage and let them, then they become really who they are, and it's not necessarily pretty to watch.
Well, but
Liz, Wendy, go ahead first.
Very quickly, just in reaction to what Lee's saying, but Mary Crawford takes it seriously. She doesn't want to act against in that scene against a stranger. So she's saying, me on stage, me, Mary Crawford, I can't do this with a stranger without changing the lines a lot. I have to have somebody with me that I can relate to, that I'm comfortable enough relating to. So knows that she's not going to be completely removed from herself, that it will still be Mary Crawford playing the part.
Is that a little hard for us to believe? Do you think Mary's the part there?
I see it as a way of her exerting influence on other people. She's using it as a method of manipulation to get something that she wants and to get attention and acquiescence.
Because she wants to play across from Edmund, right?
She brings up the subject and it's like, all you guys, think about how bad this would be if I had to say these lines to a stranger. And now we're talking about who this stranger is going to be and who we might get. And she knows Edmund's going to have a freak out. And that's exactly what he does, right? He goes to his room and he ruminates about this and he's thinking, holy cow, we can't bring in another person. And all the things she says are kind of to expose whether Edmund has read all her lines or not, but to expose how intimate they're going to be. And oh, you wouldn't want me to say them to someone else. I think she's acting all the time.
I do too.
Yeah, but Mary is acting Mary.
Yes.
And manipulating, but even on stage, Mary's going to be Mary, even in a different dress.
Yes.
I agree with you.
Yeah, two quick things. This is a really Lainey, this has been a really productive, fruitful comment. One, Edmund, when he's talking to Fanny for advice, also uses her sympathy for Mary to argue his point. Don't you feel sorry for her? And, trying to get her to acquiesce, to approve of his decision, which he's probably already made. But Bev also used the term intimate quite a few times. And is that one of Edmund's objections? What happens during the play creates some necessary intimacy?
Yeah,
And if
I mean,
anybody's ever been in play rehearsals, whether or not you're touching other people, that you really are acting with characters, and that carries over to some extent into
seems-
actual life.
yeah, it seems to be a concern over intimacy and familiar. He uses the word intimacy and
Yeah,
familiarity. And there seems to be a class distinction going on too, that like, if they invite this Charles Maxwell, or whatever his name is, he's going to be like, is he the right kind of person? And even Mr. Yates is like borderline, he's not somebody Thomas would want hanging around the house. So there's concern for feminine virtue, that it's exposing Julia and especially Mariah to situations that don't befit their female virtue. And Mary Crawford too. And then also it seems to be like preserving the hierarchy, like we're the Bertrams, like these people shouldn't feel like they can just come and go in our house anytime.
Yeah, Sir Thomas wouldn't probably like that. In fact, what did we learn about Yeats on that first page or two, which might suggest why Sir Thomas? We're told Sir Thomas would no doubt not approve of John Yates being introduced into the household. And there's a good bit of humor there also, because one more example of just something funny that I'll share is in chapter 12, when we're not given Yates's name, but before they start dancing, we're told that Tom's new intimate friend has come to visit. Again, a great yoking of words, new intimate. It's a very new friend, but an intimate one. And so that's, there's all of this stuff shaking things up a little bit. Plus also, I can't remember who, but someone mentioned appearances. Edmund is more concerned about the appearance to the others when he changes his mind. At least he's very concerned about that. I can't remember his exact language. And then Fanny on the next page, she's countered him a little bit. And she says, what's going on here for anyone who has the appearance of a gentleman to be able to come in and be intimate with us and act. So there's a whole complex of things going on with that. So yeah, really rich befuddlement, Lainey. And I'm sure we haven't entirely answered it, but we'll keep thinking about it. Okay, anybody else? Colleen has come in, Avis, Donna. We're just, before we get going a little bit more in a directed way, we're just sharing overall impressions from, I really can't stand this book, I'm trying to figure out why we're reading it, to, man, this is something, or about the slow read process, just absolutely anything right now.
I'll jump in. I guess one thing I was thinking about with this selection in particular, as someone who tries to write fiction, is I really love this small element of suspense that Austen brings in with Sir Thomas's return and what that means for Mariah. And I just love that. I stand in such admiration of that, because to give the reader something to be like, while all of this is happening, all of this action, the reader hasn't forgotten this like marriage between Mariah and Rushworth, and the reader is thinking about if they think it's a good one or not, right? Based on what the narrative is saying, but also forming our own opinions. And there's this ticking time bomb of like, well, when Sir Thomas returns, it's kind of like decision time. And I just really love that as a device of suspense. And I thought that was such a smart way to build in the background something working in the reader's mind, which is like whatever's going to go on between Mariah and Henry and Mariah and Mr. Rushworth, there's like an expiration date for it in a way, and that's tied to when Sir Thomas comes home. So I thought that this section for that reason was really interesting and exciting.
So does the suspense yield anything in this section?
I mean, at the end, he's home, right? He comes home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
And
I guess
do you remember who delivers that news?
Julia.
Julia, gloating. Julia has disappeared to some extent in this chapter, but she comes running in with the face all aghast and exclaims, "My father has come. He's in the hall at this moment." And who especially has been bringing up what will happen, what, will be going on when Sir Thomas gets back. And it's not just about the marriage, but what else that she's very concerned about.
Tearing up the house,
Oh, well, yeah. I don't think
taking
she
over
might
his
not be.
study, moving furniture,
Yeah.
putting up curtains.
Yeah. Well, they thought they'd be done with this, I think, before Sir Thomas got there. Remember, he gets in a little bit
Right.
early, but she dreads the ordination of Edmund as well. And whenever she brings this up, at least twice in this section. So that's right, Colleen, there's kind of a dread and there's a kind of suspense. And I think that Austen is really not given credit in that department of her writing sometimes. Emma has been written about as a detective novel, but all of them have, I mean, any good fiction has elements of suspense, but I think she's especially good at it. So thanks. Bev?
Hey, I just wanted to make a quick comment about slow read. When you've read the books, like I sit down in the summer and I'm reading the books, and it tends to go fairly quickly, but when with the slow read, it's really helped be able to, just focus on this one small thing. And that's been really fun. Just focus on this one small thing that's happening without everything else. But the other thing, when you talk about suspense, I know the story, but as I'm reading this, all I keep thinking is, part of me is like setting that aside and going, will he walk in now? Will he walk in now? Will he walk in now? And so she's really built for the new reader, this era of, Sir Thomas is not going to come home and go, oh, wasn't this a fun idea? Let me sit down and you can show what you've been doing. That this is going to go south super fast. And as a reader that hasn't read it before, you are really caught up in, when will he step in this process? Will people have the opportunity to become immoral before he gets there? Or will he be in time to prevent doing the wrong thing? I just find that whole part really interesting.
Thanks. Oh, what was I going to say? Oh, well. Now, what was your first point? Just take me back.
Was talking about when
oh, yeah. The slow read. I wanted to ask, please raise your hand if at this point you are still a first reader of Mansfield Park. Okay, so you're not ahead of us in the week. So that's one reason we're being really careful. And you never would, I mean, first time reading. When I was a sophomore or something in college and doing a first majors class in literature, my professor made a statement about reading. Okay, in the class, it's hard to read things twice, but ideally, when you're reading something, you should do a first read, just reading through, not analyzing, just going through it. And it should be something like the sex act. You don't want to be fully conscious, but you don't want to be unconscious either. But kind of paying attention in that way, then go through and reread. And so in the first time through, that you have the who, what, when, where fairly straight. And so we're focusing more and more as we go on, even for those of you who are first readers this time, on some whys and hows. We spent some time in our first 2 weeks on how does she do this? How are things going on? And you'll be left a little bit more to your own devices to see some of that. But it's really, I think that you've nailed these different types of reading: first reading, rereading, however many times, slow reading, are all different experiences. And so you're doing 2 in 1, slow read and first read, some of you. Okay, anything else, just in that first section, Liz?
I just wanted, one of the things that I'm sort of monitoring on this reread is how we as readers are meant to feel about the Bertrams and this whole set of people. And the extent, I think Austen is really sort of riding a fine line between amusing us with their failings, but also like, at least, I don't know, for me, the more I read this book, the more angry I get at these people who should be taking care of things. And I don't know, what one thing that really struck me on this in this section is I think it might be it's the last paragraph of chapter 17, which ends with a really weird sentence that goes on, and it's a sentence that's very difficult to parse. I had to like read it 3 times to figure out. So I have a different version, so I don't know the page number, but it's literally the last sentence of chapter.
Okay.
And the sentence begins, Tom was engrossed. Well, the sentence before that is, they were totally preoccupied. Tom was engrossed by the concerns of his theater and saw nothing that did not, oh, sorry, that's previous sentence. Edmund, between his theatrical and his real part, between Miss Crawford's claims and his own conduct, between love and consistency, was equally unobservant. And Mrs. Norris was too busy in contriving and directing the general little matters of the company, superintending the various dresses with economical expedient, for which nobody thanked her, and saving with delighted integrity 1/2 crown here and there to the absent Sir Thomas, to have leisure for watching the behavior or guarding the happiness of his daughters. Very convoluted sentence, but you know, he's saying like nobody's watching out for these girls. Nobody's watching out for the well-being of Julia and Mariah, alone Mary Crawford or Fanny. And this is especially poignant because Sir Thomas explicitly put his trust in the well-being of his daughters on Mrs. Norris. Before he left, I think it's just his own interior thoughts. I don't think he said this out loud, but he did not trust his wife with their well-being because he knows his wife. But he really thought that, like, with Edmund around and Mrs. Norris around, and in that sentence, Austen says specifically that Edmund wasn't paying attention and Mrs. Norris either. And so
Morris wasn't
it's
paying
really
attention.
poignant.
But is
When-
it, but, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Melissa, jump in.
I would just argue that someone is paying attention, and I think that's Fanny.
Yep.
I think she has the highest social IQ in this story. I think that's the kind of, the trick of Fanny, right? She came to this family and everyone expects nothing of her and underestimates her and continues to say she's worth nothing, but she's been the one who is seeing everything and has the highest knowledge of everyone. And she's keeping an eye on the girls, the guys, all these characters. She is seeing this all play out, and not for the first time. She saw it when they were in the garden, and now she's seeing it again. And it's like the third
the whole
act of this book, right? Where like there's the garden scene, there's the play scene, but there's also the scene of this book that's kind of an interesting repetition of these characters getting different chances at trying for these relationships and these schemes.
She
And
was
what's
power.
scary about the situation is that she's the most emotionally intelligent, the most observant, the most concerned with morality of anyone in this book. And yet she has the least power to influence other people's behavior. And she does make like little forays, you know, like with Edmund, geez, like if I didn't know better, I could almost think that Henry Crawford was flirting with Mariah, and Edmund's like, oh, you know, you got that wrong. So she had, and then another scene that's so poignant to me is the one where Edmund comes to her room to ask what he should do. And he's explicitly outsourcing his conscience to her. He's saying, you know, if you don't approve of it, then I can't approve of it. And she doesn't approve of it, but he does it anyway. So he recognizes that she is the, you know, that she's the moral guardian of this household.
Mhm.
And yet the
And
person
goes, sorry.
strongest moral sense has the least influence over anyone's.
Well, and he says, if I don't have your approval, cousin, and then he manipulates her into thinking that he has it. So that's, he's scheming and manipulating through this is something. Bev, were you going to comment?
No, I was just agreeing absolutely with that, with Fanny's powerlessness, that she has these astute powers of observation, but she has no ability to stop anything. You know,
Well,
she
she doesn't have the
don't want
backbone.
to hear her.
She doesn't have the backbone to say it.
Yeah, and she's not strong
Okay.
enough.
Is it backbone? What does keep Fanny?
I think it's her position. I think it's her
Okay.
very vulnerable position there is that she, and you know, we see in the section we read for today, Mrs. Norris effectively putting her in her place, saying, geez, Fanny, your cousins are asking a small favor, and given who you are and what you are, I want you know, played along. So, you know, it goes back to, you know, before Fanny even arrived at the house, the, you know, the gods on Olympus who are arranging this adoption say, you know, she can never be a Miss Bertram. Like there can't be any, you know, she will never be equal. And so place in the house is so explicit. So, I mean, we see that she does have backbone in terms of insisting that she won't act, but I think she feels like it would be improper for her to say out loud unless like Edmund comes and asks her.
We need to keep very clear in our minds that Fanny is a changing character. She's developing, and we need to be careful about overgeneralizing from any one point. Whereas you're right, she's still not speaking out that much. We've already noticed how in the first two sections, she's progressed from opening her mouth to, you know, being even slightly confrontational. And in this section, what's her first insistence out loud to everyone?
She can't be.
I can't act. No, I won't act. And that's in chapter 13. And after that, I think it's in, oh no, this is it's in chapter 15, where they come after her again. And Mrs. Norris utterly humiliates her. Considering who you are, her whole background, the whole class situation comes up in front of them. You should be obliging your cousins. And Mary Crawford steps up, soothes her some, and Mary Crawford brings up all these things that are going to happen, as we said, when Sir Thomas comes home, besides Mariah's wedding or Edmund's ordination. We've mentioned Mariah's wedding, and Mary Crawford here alludes to when Fanny will come out at Mariah's wedding. So that's just another signpost for us. Austen is very good about setting those up. Now, after this, we go to chapter 16, where, and let's talk about Fanny's actual places in the house, the East Room. Turn to chapter 16, if you will. And after, when she's trying to recover from this rebuke, in spite of Mary trying to help her some, we find her in the East Room. And what do we learn about the room and about her? This is the first appearance of it. Then in chapter, I think it's 18, right, the very end, Fanny's in the East Room again, where she's gone to escape the final rehearsals before the long rehearsal that evening, or the next night or that evening or something. So the East Room, chapters 16 and 17. 16 and 18. Flip through a little.
Well, we know the East Room, this is Bev. We know the East Room is the room next to her room, and it was the classroom. And that her room is very little. So the white room is little, the white attic, the little white attic
Mhm.
is small. And that she has started to, initially she started to take over the classroom because she had books, and that now everyone says this is her room. And so she has placed some of her things in there, and her books are there, and it's her place of respite.
And it's unheated.
And
There's no
unheated.
fire.
Actually, the attic would be above it. So the old schoolroom would have been a
Oh, okay.
section where they had fireplaces, but hers just has not been lit.
No, hers is not lit.
What else are we told? Just flip through a few pages. What does your eye land on? What do we
She
learn?
has very pleasant memories of this room and her experience in the schoolroom.
Mhm.
Considering how hard it was for her when she first came, it's interesting that she has pleasant memories there and she feels
You
safe.
know, I'm not sure, are her memories of that period, do you think?
No, it's her ownership of the space, I think.
It's all her
Mhm.
stuff around her, isn't it?
It's
Right, but she looks back at it positively about Miss Lee helping her and stuff.
Yeah, okay.
She, whereas she could have had very negative memories because the girls were always mocking her because she didn't have the improvements that they had,
Mhm.
And so
I think that there's two things about the room that make it so precious to her. One is, I mean, this isn't Jane Austen language, but, she's the classic introvert, and she needs that place where she can reach
mhm.
and to have this place where she can go and process, again, Jane Austen would never use language, but process what's been happening in her own space is just so precious to her. And then the actual things in the room are very
Right.
beloved.
Yes.
The thing that's so endearing to me about this scene is that she really does love all these things. And the narrator is very clear that these are all cast-offs. There's like a footstool that I think Julia made that was too ill done for the sitting room. So that, some work boxes that either her cousins, that either the girls, the hand-me-downs from the girls or presents from Tom. But she earnestly treasures them. She
Mhm.
loves this space, and again, the lack of the fire in there is tied to Mrs. Norris. Like, that's the only
Oh
thing
yeah.
Mrs. Norris, that Fanny should have a room of her own, given her position as well, at least they're not hating
Yeah.
it.
And Liz is right about just a second, Winnie. Liz is right about cast-offs, but we also have her plans, her books, of which she had been a collector, her writing desk, her works of charity and ingenuity, all within her reach. She could scarcely see an object in that room which had not an interesting remembrance. We're told it's comforting, consoling. Wendy, what were you going to add?
Actually, I'm just bouncing off what you're both saying, agreeing. And one step farther is that because what was in the room were cast-offs, plural, and in addition to her own books and her own things, that nobody wanted her books, nobody wanted the cast-offs, nobody wanted to come because it wasn't heated. They wanted nothing to do with the former schoolroom, so Fanny could own it. So I'm really just, I'm just moving along where Liz started and where you read out loud to say, of course. And another thing that occurred to me in this conversation is that Fanny's head is getting bigger and bigger with all the things she can't say out loud. She's kind of stuffed with what they tell her and what she sees, what she can't comment on. Liz?
Her heart is full of it. Her heart is so full of these things.
Yes. But she can go to her own room and detox? No. Decompress.
Yes, yeah.
With her own books and spread them out. She knows nobody's going to open the door because it's cold or hot in the summer.
Yep.
So the suffering is not important because she can have privacy.
And it changes her suffering. We're told that, in fact, here, this is after Mrs. Norris's humiliation. she looks at everything around, like the Tintern Abbey transparency, the sketch of a ship sent by William, etc., that the whole was now so blended together, so harmonized by distance, that every former affliction had its charm. And here's where we're told that some rejects. The next paragraph begins, to this nest of comforts, Fanny now walked down to try its influence on an agitated, doubting spirit. So that's our real introduction to the East Room. There's more to say about that. Then we get it, you start into her mind. What ought she to do? Was she right in refusing, etc.? But anything else about the room itself?
Well, I think she can relate to all of these things, the cast-offs, because she's sort of a cast-off,
Yep.
you know? Yeah.
Yep.
Very good.
Yep. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
But she's also very aware, even though she's living among the cast-offs, I mean, she's so generous in her outlook. You know, she doesn't condemn these characters the way I do. The way I think Austen intends the reader to. I mean, I think that's part of the game here, is that Austen is painting these people to be much more sinister than Fanny is now in most cases. But you know, she's looking at these things that have been given to her, and she feels from that a sense of obligation. And you know, let me see the site. So the table between the windows was covered with work boxes and netting boxes, which had been given her at different times, principally by Tom. And she grew bewildered as to the amount of the debt which all these kind remembrances produced. So she is, again, very aware, you know, even without Mrs. Norris, you know, pushing her down, she's very aware of her vulnerable position and her dependency within this household. And she's really, I mean, I think she's like a little moral philosopher there. She's really trying to think through, does her dependence obligate her to do what they're asking her to do? Is she right to stand up for her principle and her aversion to acting? Or is she really she's really questioning her own moral decision, I think, because she's so aware that she owes these people so much.
Yeah. And right after all of this musing, we have someone invade. Wendy said she doesn't expect anyone there. And we have two invasions of Fanny's East Room. The first one in this chapter is Edmund. And we've talked a bit about that, how Edmund manipulates the situation. And at the end of the chapter, we've talked about the importance of beginning and ending paragraphs in chapters. Fanny says, the deeper anxiety swallowed up everything else. Things should take their course. She cared not how it ended. Her cousins might attack, but could hardly tease her. She was beyond their reach. And if at last obliged to yield, no matter. It was all misery now. Now she doesn't stay there, but that's where she is at the end of chapter 16. Who were most of the gifts from? Let's kind of circle back. We've been assuming that everybody's getting, you know, what's happening through Here Under Control, and we'll review that at the beginning of our session next week. But let's flip back to chapter 12. And Tom is not a primary character, finally. Tom is a functional character. He's disappeared for most of the book until now, and he returns in September and finds that he comes back, Henry Crawford comes back. This is just after everyone has returned from Southerton, not in harmony. So this is that transitional chapter, getting us set up for the Lover's Vow section. Tom comes in, and what happens where Fanny is toward the end of this chapter, Fanny has to kind of laugh at him. She's hoping, there's a dance going on. It's her first ball. It's really informal. They just got 5 couples from the area. And Fanny's hoping that Tom will come in and dance with her. What happens? Remember?
He doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
He doesn't until he finally uses it as a way of escaping. Then he
Okay.
quick grabs her hands and
Yep.
says, "Oh, let's go to our dance,"
Yeah, yeah. Well, because he comes in first, picking up a newspaper, telling her about a sick horse. If you want to dance, Fanny, I will stand up with you. With more than equal civility, the offer was declined. She knew he didn't want to dance. And when he wants to dance, what prompts it? When he grabs Fanny to go dance, remember?
It was to be part of a game of cards or something. If I
Right.
Wanted to play,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want to play with that group, and he doesn't want to
Right.
play the game. He doesn't want to be stuck for 2 hours when he would be stuck only 30 minutes dancing with
Right.
Fanny.
Right.
Mhm.
It struck me that this scene, it's like, it's the opposite of Mr. Knightley rescuing,
Mm.
where
Oh,
Mr. Knightley is
yeah.
not trying to dance, but he sees this horrible wrong happening. And so he, walks across the room and
Miss Smith.
noble act when he asks Harriet to
Mhm.
dance.
Yeah.
This is the opposite of that, where he
Yeah.
like grabs her, doesn't, I mean, the fact is she wants to dance and we know that, but he doesn't know that. She's declined him. And
Mhm.
then he has the nerve to complain about people who rope people into stuff without giving them a chance.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. It's a fairly hard-hitting section there. Now, Tom, he's the one, we're told first early on that he's the oldest cousin, and he just looks at Fanny as another sister, someone to have fun, have to poke around and make fun of. But he's generous. He gives her these gifts. He's open. He's kind of a comic figure here. When he sits down, he's talking about all these sets of lovers dancing, all but Yates and Mrs. Grant. And she's a poor woman. She must want to love her as much as any of them. And he's talking about this when he suddenly realizes Dr. Grant is at his elbow. And he turns and says, "A strange business, this in America, Dr. Grant." And Fanny could hardly help laughing. We're not told very often that Fanny laughs, but she laughs here and at Tom. And we'll be talking about this strange business in America next week. But then, so he grabs her to keep from being forced to sit down and play cards, to dance. And that's when he's complaining. If you look at the last paragraph in chapter 17, just before chapter 18.
Wait, chapter 17 or chapter?
End of 17, page
Oh,
before
okay.
chapter 18. So last paragraph, last section. He's complaining to Fanny, as was just pointed out. She asked me in such
You
a
mean
way
chapter
to
12, right? The
end of, I'm sorry. End
Okay.
of chapter 12. Yes, thank you. Okay, there. That is italicized, if you see that. Just above that. And to ask me in such a way too, without ceremony, before them all, so as to leave me no possibility of refusing. Is that Fanny's life? That is what I dislike most particularly. It raises my spleen more than anything to have the pretense of being asked, of being given a choice, and at the same time addressed in such a way as to oblige one to do the very thing. Austen has been hitting us with examples of this. We see Tom's hypocrisy here, et cetera, et cetera. In the next chapter, he has brought his new intimate friend Yates along with him, who introduces the notion of acting plays. Now, as I've said, when Tom appears, he's a functional character. When he reappears, things happen. First, we have a scene with him with his father, right? He's ruined the finances of the family to some extent. He's one part of it. When he comes back, he brings his friend, and they're both careless and idle. And Tom is running around with the aristocratic crowd, and he's the engine behind this play, right?
Yates is. And
Well,
then-
Yates plants the seed. Tom's the one.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Let's do
in
this.
charge.
He runs
Yeah,
with it.
and he's in charge, isn't he? All the way through?
Yeah.
And how does he respond to Edmund when Edmund says, "I don't think we should be doing this. I don't think our father would approve, et cetera, et cetera."
You let me take care of what our father
Mhm.
will or will not approve of.
I'm the master of the house now. He's the
Mhm.
eldest, he's the heir. And so we have no guidance from either Aunt Norris or Lady Bertram. Edmund is trying to be an authority figure here and a guide. Tom knocks him out of the picture. I'm the master here now. I will take care of everything. You take care of yourself. I'll take care of everyone else. And when you think through this whole section, that's what we see what happens with it with under Tom's guidance. In fact, let's talk very quickly about the narrative arcs with some of these characters. From right now, from the proposal of doing lovers' vows to the end, when they're going to do their final rehearsal and Sir Thomas walks in. Who's in better shape, who's in worse, what are their experiences? Let's just summarize as well as we can in the few minutes that we have.
Well, Edmund has compromised his values.
Okay.
And in order to live with that, he has to be in love with Mary Crawford.
That's why he's compromising them, because he is in
He's
love with
Right.
because he
Yeah.
he thinks he is.
Yeah.
Well, he
At least
also
he's
feels like he's
manipulated into
protecting
that.
her,
Yes.
right?
Okay, Melissa?
He also feels like he's protecting her from this outsider coming in.
Yeah.
He feels like he's kind of standing up and being chivalrous, but he really is
right.
doing it because it's an opportunity to be
Mhm.
with her in that way, right?
Yep.
And he can excuse his behavior.
Yep. And as we said before, that's his last act in pushing Fanny out, Fanny's advice, saying, well, I'm surprised you don't have more feeling for Mary's situation in this. Edmund actually pushes harder. What else does Edmund do by the end, especially in relation to Fanny?
Pushes her in. He pushes
The
her
last-
in.
For the third time, they're trying to get Fanny to act.
Mhm.
And Edmund's voice joins the chorus. If it wouldn't be too disagreeable, wouldn't you do it, Fanny? And you might take a look again before next week at how and when and why Fanny buckles, lets herself go up on the stage, which is where she is when Julia comes running in saying that Sir Thomas is here. We're in the fourth or fifth paragraph from the end of chapter 18. We're told, but Fanny still hung back. She could not endure the idea of it. Why was not Miss Crawford to be applied to as well? So she's feeling picked on. Well, she wishes she'd gone to her own room. Henry Crawford is a little insulting. He says, you only have to read the part. Mariah says she can say every word of it. She put Mrs. Grant right the other day in 20 places. Fanny, I'm sure you know the part. Fanny could not say she did not. And as they all persevered, as Edmund repeated his wish, and with a look of even fond dependence on her good nature, she must yield. She would do her best. Everybody was satisfied, and she was left to the tremors of a palpitating heart. This goes back to the question of whether Fanny has no backbone or why she does what she does. In terms of standing up to Sir Thomas, we've talked before about gratitude, her extreme sense of owing him something, and that's even been thrown in her face, right? Do you think she's feeling something of the same regarding Edmund here? She stood up against all of the other cousins and friends, pushing her to act. Edmund stands up for her then. Edmund is no longer standing up for her at this point, and she yields. But Fanny has a long, complicated relationships to the plays. What's the arc of her experience of plays throughout this? Where does she start? Has she ever seen one?
Nope.
No,
Is she charmed by it?
no.
Oh, the experience of the plays themselves? What are her positive?
When it's first brought up, she's looking forward to it because she's never seen a play
Yeah.
herself.
Yep.
She's excited about the idea of like, oh, I get to see a play. And then when she reads the play, everyone else leaves the room and she actually sits down and reads the thing. Of course, she's a quick reader. She reads it right away. And she's horrified at the choice of play. So she's not, she doesn't think that Sir Thomas would approve of it. So she's down on the whole thing, but she's kind of, selfishly looking forward to it because at least she'll get to see a play. Then once she reads the actual play, then her moral outrage, kicks into high.
Even after that, what does she get into during the run up to this? And people are rehearsing, other people are doing needlework, there are carpenters in the house, a scene painter comes from London. What's Fanny doing?
She's helping.
Yeah, she's into it. She's loving the rehearsals. In fact, at the beginning of chapter 18, we're told everything was now in a regular train. Fanny found before many more days were passed that it was not all interrupted enjoyment for the others. So there's an arc for you. Fanny was in distress, and by the end, she's the happiest one at the beginning of chapter 18. Everybody else has complaints. And Austin does a great job of pulling this together, summing it up for us. Fanny, this is about the second paragraph in chapter 18. Fanny, being always a very courteous listener and often the only listener at hand, came in for the complaints and distresses of most of them. She knew Mr. Yates wasn't thought to be very good, that Rushford didn't know any of his lines, etc. Then we're told about her, turn a page or two, trying to teach Rushford how to learn, giving him all the helps and directions. So she's becoming almost like a director of the play, isn't she? She's into it. She knows all the lines. They know she could stand in. She's really having fun with it. The gloom of her first anticipations was proved to have been unfounded. She was occasionally useful to all. She was perhaps as much at peace as any. In this chat at the end, she certainly is. There was a great deal of needlework. And anyway, this goes on. I love, one of my favorite bits of humor is Mrs. Norris. In a paragraph saying, "You had better stay till the curtain is hung." Fanny has suggested that Lady Bertram go to the full rehearsal. I think it's the following night. And Mrs. Norris says, "The curtain will be hung in a day or two. There's very little sense in a play without a curtain. And I am much mistaken if you do not find it draw up into very handsome festoons." So we see different people's investments. And so anyway, there's just a whole lot to track here, from other characters, the arcs of their experience. Be thinking about it. Some of them are pretty obvious, others are really pretty funny. Yates is at the beginning and at the end. He's at the beginning filled with disappointment, and at the end, well, we'll find out where he is at the end when we begin talking next week. So please also for next week, besides reading volume 2, chapters 1 through 6, or in the others, chapters 19 through 24, be thinking back to Lover's Vows, and it will be a touchstone for us from time to time, because this is the most significant intertextual, what we call the most significant other text that has influence on this book all the way through to the end. We will talk more about scheming and manipulating that goes through, whether that continues after the rehearsals for Lover's Vow are over, bits of jealousy and competition, which really reached crisis points during this section, the rehearsals for Lover's Vows, and what happens with that as we go on. So is this play over? Not for us, right? It lives on, and as our characters live on. So I think at the end of next week's reading, we will be halfway through the book. Centers, as I've said before, always are meaningful to me, and maybe I impute meaning onto them, but I really do, as a literary interpreter, pay attention to those positions. So let's see, remember where we've been, especially these chapters now 13 to 18, and they set us out into 19. Sir Thomas is back, and we'll see where we are by the end of chapter 24. Anything, last remarks?
Oh, nice conclusion.
Very nice.
Well, thank you for being here. I think, we didn't take ourselves through chapter by chapter, so we're kind of on our own doing that. However, we still need to have it pretty well in mind. Those arcs, developments of characters, a passage through time, etc. Who appears when? Because there are disappearances. Sir Thomas has been gone for most of the book so far, right? We meet him at first. He rails against Tom for the need to go to Antigua and ruining Edmund, and then he's gone. Tom has been gone all that time until this last section with Lover's Vows. And then we'll see who comes and goes and how things develop. Anything else? Questions or setting up next week? Okay. Thanks for
See you.
coming.
Thank you.
I bet. Great to
Thank
see
you.
you all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye.